Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today with me is Johnny Warström, who is the CEO of Mentimeter. Johnny, can you tell us a little bit about what Mentimeter does for those folks who don't know much about it?
Of course. Mentimeter, or sometimes nicknamed Menti, it's a software service where you can, as a leader, engage with participants in meetings, in person, hybrid, or remote, with the purpose of engaging to gain insight or engagement or brainstorm, gain any type of data from people that participate in a meeting to become a more efficient and effective leader.
And so let's talk a little bit about hybrid meetings, because I help 24 organizations figure out their future work policy, hybrid work, and that's a big pain point. So having hybrid meetings where some people are in the room and some people are coming in remotely. What are your thoughts about some best practices for hybrid meetings and how leaders can have them more effectively?
Yeah, I think this is the future that is stabilizing now. Like companies argue if it's going to be 20 or 40 or 60% either way, but I think that we're quite sure that it's going to be a hybrid world in the future. And I think that one of the biggest problems that I see, because I also lead an organization that is very often in a hybrid setting, is the hybrid divide, as we call it internally. I don't know if it's a generic term or not, but that people in the room and remotely are given different voices, and the value of the voices are being treated different. And I think it's really important for a leader to be conscious about that, and in different ways of your leadership to counter that. Because it can't really be that people in the room's voices should be more important than remote people's. It's an interesting fact for many years, and still in many companies, a man's voice was more valuable than a woman's voice. And likewise here, but in a different way, that people in a room's voice are more valued because you see and can interact as a person than people who are remote. And for me, it's like there's different tricks to this, to how to lead a remote organization or hybrid organization, hybrid meetings. And I think preparing is often one of the best things. That, like, if your pre-reads a hybrid setting often becomes more equal, because everyone, no matter if you're in the room or not, have prepared for the meeting in an equal way. And then also in the meeting, that when you have interactivity, when you ask people questions or poll people for their opinions or open up for Q&A, use different type of anonymous tools that make and tools that are not kind of raising your hand. You all been in those hybrid meetings where no one really noticed if a person on Zoom kind of raised their hand because they're not seen in the room. And there are like digital solution that works both for people in the room and for people remote, and that can kind of like equalize the level field. And then it's often after the meeting, obviously, like, okay, have we taken a decision here? Is everyone on board with it? How do we follow up to the next meeting? Because one meeting or one presentation is not an island in itself. It does connect to other meetings and presentations. And then like the pre and post experience is really important. So I think that's my learnings from being a CEO at a hybrid company currently.
And so we're thinking about the people who are coming in remotely. And I think it's important that you mentioned the divide between men and women, because it's also the case that women tend to spend more time working remotely than men. So kind of the double whammy of women not being, unfortunately, in traditional culture, in companies not being paid as much attention to men, and people who are remote not getting as much attention as people who are in the room. So it's very important to address that. Now, what are some best practices tactically of addressing that? So when I help clients, I advise them to do things like having all the participants in the room bring their laptops so they're all present and on video, and they're all following along with any chatting that's happening. by people who are remote, and they can also chat themselves, and they can use emojis, whether it's raising hands or so on, so that they can pay attention to people who are remote, people who are in the room, and having a meeting facilitator who is focusing more on the experience of remote people, who's not the main meeting facilitator, not the leader, to get them paid attention to by somebody who is not going to be cognitively overloaded. What are your thoughts about these and other tactics? What have you seen work? Because obviously you're in this space.
I love it. I use all of those tricks, and like we learned really early on during the pandemic about that. When coming back from the pandemic, like the one laptop per person kind of trick, they kind of equalize. That's a really important thing, I think, for people. One thing I also use a lot is to really early on in the meeting, in the hybrid meeting, to be to poll people, to ask people something in an anonymous way, so that you create. It can be obviously, it often is about the subject you're about to talk about. It's not to kind of decide the subject, or it's not the decision question, but to open up for anonymous input, where everyone can voice their opinion. Then when everyone sees other people's opinion in the room being anonymously shared, you also open up for a much more like a leaning in kind of attitude in the meeting. So I think that's a really interesting trick to do early on in a hybrid meeting, where it also can kind of equal the room out. Because then when you have those possible in front of you, then people that remote contribute on the same level as people in the room on the meeting to the rest of the meeting.
Okay. And so, yeah, so it sounds like having an anonymous poll can be helpful. Now, I'm curious about the anonymity, because one of the things about Zoom tools is that, let's say you're having a Microsoft Teams meeting. I mean, they don't have very good polling, or your Zoom, it doesn't allow, or there's less room for anonymity. Why do you think anonymity is important versus just people being able to share who they are when they express their opinion?
I think it's I think the safety, to create a safe space. It's two things. Sorry, let me go back. It's two things. One is that you don't want to skew the room. Like, you go back 10 years, and whose opinion in the room mattered. It was the older man in the back voicing their opinion first. And when they voiced their opinion first, they leaned the entire room. So often the discussion became like they anchored it, and then the discussion became like versus that person's voice. If you do it anonymously straight off before anyone has kind of anchored their opinion, you after that you create a much more equal discussion, and that's also, again, like many women now is in room or hybrid or remote, and also like equal those voices, then that open up, and that needs to be anonymous, because you know the first voice shouldn't be someone who has like unofficial power in the room, or can raise their hand physically or not. And then I think like not on this, like that's more to kind of create an atmosphere where people's voices are equally heard, and where it's a good discussion point. And I think that's also coming to yes, a lot of discussions, and especially the decisions in meetings is up to one person, the leader. Very often we don't take it's a group decision. It's one leader to take the decision. But I think also to do anonymous views and opinions on subjects is also a way to kind of like, okay, if there wasn't a hierarchy, or there wasn't experience taken into consideration here, me as a leader, for example, why do I have a different view than other people that is not my perspective or my responsibility to take the decision? And to have that kind of the reflection point of what would that the democratic vote, so to say, democratic view versus my. And I think that I, as a leader, can become a better leader and take better decisions if I have that mirror.
Okay, excellent. Now, what are your thoughts about what the future of hybrid meetings will look like with the rise of generative AI and perhaps other tools? But I think generative AI seems like the thing that can most impact hybrid meetings.
It's a really, really interesting development. We obviously, AI for like 9 months, 12 months ago was one of the biggest competitive edges you can have. And now all of a sudden, everyone has access to it. So obviously the base technology will be in every service, in every tool, everywhere, which also makes the generic content and a lot of the things that is by kind of pre-reads, might be long, might be short, it doesn't matter. Like everything becomes much more efficient, but what cannot be efficient to the discussions and the innovation layer of kind of connecting the generic created AI stuff, at least for like until we have completely generic AI, but the AI that exists now and in the future years at least. So I think that interactivity in meetings, engagement between people, the exchange of ideas, enriching of viewpoints, I think that will take an even bigger part of a workday. So if I look at my engineering department at Mentimeter, writing code and annotating code and understanding where in the code I can improve myself, that is kind of skyrocketed in efficientness. So do we just write more code and do that, or do we take that time that you save there to meet between the product design and engineers to iterate and facilitate the discussion on the next innovation in the service that we can deliver to our customers? And to do that, you need much more human interactivity, creativity, innovation. So I think with help of AI, I think that the things that I love, which is the creative part of my work, not the grind, will have will take a much bigger part of daily life of knowledge workers.
I think so too. Well, let's hope that will be the case. Are there any last words with which you wish to leave our audience, Johnny?
No, like just love the show and thanks for kind of putting a spotlight on this subject. It's really, really interesting, and I think a lot of people struggle on kind of finding their way here. And I think that thanks for the hybrid workplace is here to stay, obviously. So let's help out to become better.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing your expertise. That was very helpful.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you check this out and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and it helps us improve the show. All right, everyone. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. In the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.